All right, I think I'm back.
You're all set.
And that didn't end the meeting?
It didn't. It made me host, and then it said I could close the breakout rooms. But I think by the time I clicked it, you were back and the actual host again. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good news. Did you message the cohort channel?
I did not. I was about to.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Awesome.
Kevin, what happened with you?
I discovered that my alarm does not work if I forget to bring it to bed. So
Oh, not a Zoom issue.
No.
Okay, got it. Cool. I'm going to close the rooms then. Go ahead and look at the cohort channel. I dropped the what we're going to be working on.
Yeah, the customer dashboard story.
Yep. For the folks that are coming back from the breakout rooms, did you all notice any weirdness with Zoom? Was everything working okay? Okay.
It seemed fine. Someone else was in our breakout room for like 3 seconds before they got switched somewhere else, or they switched somewhere else.
That was expected. That was me.
Okay, cool.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess we're good to go then. All right, everybody, welcome back. Yeah, I think I'm ready to. I think I'm going to go ahead and just start calling on some people. So let's hear from. Yeah, I will call on the groups. So let's do that. So can I hear from group one? So that was Dougie, Joe, Joey, Olivia. Can you all give me? I think we'll just go round robin through this. Can you all give me one table and one column from that table that we're working with?
The transactions table, and we need where the result is successful.
Perfect. So transactions, and then we'll need that result column. And I'll hold off on the idea of like that the result needs to be successful. Let's go to Andrew, Austin, Brisa, Khan.
We also have to join customers to merchants through the items table.
Mm-hmm. So what's the column we're going to need?
Oh, the column. I'm not sure.
Anyone from that group want to help us out?
Would it be the?
Is it the name on the merchants? Is that our end game?
Sorry, let me pull up the story text. So yeah, it's we're trying to find the top 5 merchants, and it says it doesn't necessarily say like the name of the top 5 merchants. So I would just take that to mean the entire merchant. So if I'm like looking at the merchants table, how could I represent all of the columns from that table?
Merchant.star.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, that's one right there. So merchant star. We're just going to need everything from the merchants table. If it doesn't tell me otherwise, if I'm trying to get merchants, I'll just say like, let me get all of the data from that merchant table. You know, maybe we want to show the merchant name and then also like when they're created at, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go to room 3, Aiden, Alexander, and Galen. Can you all give me another one?
Sure. We'll need invoice items with columns, quantity, and unit price.
Item. So that's a twofer right there. Let's try and stick with one column at a time, but yes, quantity and unit price. Room number 4, that's Joe, Logan, and Ryan.
Yeah, I can go for that. I believe it would be revenue.
So we don't have a revenue column on any of our tables.
Yeah, but we could make one.
Right, but that's not what we're asking right now. So that's a really good point here, Ryan, is we're trying to do things like very intentionally, one step at a time. And if we go back to, I'm actually gonna just like go into the code help channel. And if you all wanna do this as well, I'm just gonna scroll up to that thinking about SQL queries diagram. So right now we're trying to figure out the first two questions. Actually, we're probably doing 1 and 3 right now. If you're looking at the thinking about SQL queries diagram. So we're thinking about what tables do I need, which is our from statement, and what columns do I need. So yeah, we are going to need to get to the revenue eventually, but let's hold off on that for right now. So what other columns are we going to need?
So what do we have already? We have invoice items, quantity, unit price. We have a transaction result. Do we have the quantity? We have quantity, unit price. Seems like we're getting close here to having everything we need. Transaction results. We have transaction. Yeah, I can't see anything we're really missing.
Joe or Logan, do you have an idea of something else we could put in here?
Will we need to link to items somehow to get through to merchants? Or
will we need to link to items to get to merchants? That's a good question. Let's go to group number 5. Let's go to Andrew, Claudia, and Wyatt. Can you all give me another column we might need?
Yeah. I think it was mentioned earlier, but it doesn't look like it was written down. We need the customer info so we can limit it to yourself.
Yeah.
And we can get that either through the ID of the customer table, or the ID also exists in the invoice. So since all we need is the ID, we could just get it from invoice instead of having to actually use the customer table.
Yeah, interesting. That is an interesting point. I'm going to leave it as customers ID for now. There might be some way that we could refactor it. That's a really good point, Andrew. Thank you. Let's go to group number 6, George, Keegan, and Ksenia.
I can speak for a group. I said that we would go into the customers and find the merchant ID, and then we could just forego attaching the merchant table, because it didn't say we needed to find anything besides the actual merchant. But I don't know if that's more effective or not.
What is the column that you're referring to?
Merchant ID within the customer table.
Merchant ID within the customer table. While I'm looking at this, I'm going to pull up my my schema.
I mean, so, merchant ID within the item table.
There we go.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
Customers don't have a direct relation to a merchant. Yes. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go, where do I want to put that? Maybe down here, items, and then merchant ID. There we go. So this is our first foreign key that we've put in here. But these are columns that we are going to need. So I think some of you have said, like, we're going to need to join these tables. We're going to need to like connect these two tables together. Thinking about the tables of data, we really need to identify what are the keys that are going to connect those tables together. All right, so I think I've hit every group now. Can I get some volunteers? What other columns are we going to need? Alexander?
Do we need the customer ID and invoices in order to join customers to invoice items?
Customer ID in invoices?
Yep.
Yes. Yep. So now, if I kind of just move these around, now we can see this connection right here from customers to invoices. So they're linked by that customer ID. Yep. And this is the column that Andrew mentioned before, but I just specifically chose the ID for his one column. Olivia.
You would need the transaction ID and invoices because that's how those two link.
Transaction ID in invoices. I don't believe an invoice has a transaction ID. It does not. So the relationship isn't that an invoice has one transaction. An invoice can have many transactions. What I'd recommend while we're doing this all is to pull up your schema on your end. Let me actually just show you what I did because I had to do this. I just went into my project and opened up schema.rb. So when I say what tables and what columns do we need, I'm literally looking through this and I'm like, do I need that one? 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 These are your tables and columns. So let's go back to the whiteboard here. Joe, what do you think?
Well, I think it's what Olivia was getting at, but just kind of the opposite. So the transactions has invoice ID.
There you go. Yep. So the invoice ID is going to be the connection between our transactions and our invoices. So maybe I'll just put those right next to each other. And then my items is a little far in the corner. What else might we need? Alexander?
In invoice items, you need item ID.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then what else might we need?
Invoice ID.
There you go. Yep. So now I can put, maybe I'll kind of do it like this. So transactions, yeah, let's do it like this. So we have our customers, which looks like it's going to get us to our invoices. And then from invoices, we can go to invoice items through that invoice ID. And we can go to transactions with that invoice ID. Like that. And then from invoice items, we can get to items. And then from items, we can get to merchants. And that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. So that is all of our tables. So this is a query where we're going to have to connect all of those tables together. So we're probably going to need almost all of our foreign keys. That might actually be all of them. Andrew?
Yeah. Is it an issue that it looks like we're going to have to like connect from like customers to invoice and then from invoice to trend or no, I'm sorry. Sorry. And then move up to transactions and then down to the other things like are we going to have to do the invoice ID twice?
We are going to have to do something there. Yeah, so you kind of, that's why I laid out these tables like this as I was moving them around. We get to invoices, but then invoices is kind of like a fork in the road to get to both transactions and invoice items. Yeah, we're gonna have to do something to handle that, but I will show you how to do that. Okay, any other columns that we might need, or if someone wants to be brave and volunteer and say, no, I think that looks good, that's everything we're gonna need. And I'm going to scroll through my schema. I haven't done this query, by the way, so we're working through this together. You're seeing me really think through this. There's a couple status columns, but I think given the way this story is written, given the way I wrote the story, I don't think we'll need the status columns. Ryan?
Do we have the result column listed? I mean, I know we can do like
Yes,
a
we do.
where statement. Okay.
Yeah, that's supposed to be like this, transactions, and then we'll need the result in the invoice ID. Yeah. Alexander?
Do we need to like list the actual IDs within each item? Like we have, we have item
yeah.
ID. Yeah, like in items, that would need an ID.
Yeah.
In invoices, that would need an ID.
Yep, I think you're right about that. Invoices need an ID. Yes, invoices need an ID to match with that invoice ID on invoice items. Yep, great point. Yeah,
And
are there other
transaction.
tables? Yep.
I think that might be it.
Oh, you weren't saying we need the transaction ID. You were saying the transaction invoice ID will need the invoice ID. Is that right?
Yeah, no, actually I was saying transaction ID, but I guess we don't need that.
Yeah, I don't think we need the transaction ID because there's no like transaction ID foreign key anywhere. So we don't need to match that with anything. Versus like item ID goes to items ID, invoice ID goes to invoices ID, merchant ID goes to merchants. Yeah, maybe just to be very explicit, I know that I have the star already, which is indicating all the columns, but I do want to just put the ID there. That'll help me diagram it a little bit more. Any other columns we can think of? I think this is looking pretty good here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a pomp here. And then when we come back, we will start to figure out what we're gonna do with these columns. So let's come back at 9:38. 9:38. All right, give everybody a couple more seconds to get back, and then we'll keep going with this diagram. All right, so we have identified the tables and the columns that we're going to need. Next, we're going to diagram what we're going to do with those columns. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and connect all of these foreign keys together. So I think I will do it like, yeah, let's do it like this. So customer ID pointing to this customer's ID, this invoice ID pointing to, it's going to get a little messy. Let's draw a box around them. Customer ID like that. Yeah, and while I'm at it, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight all of my foreign keys and my primary keys. So just all of my keys. And we can do that to that one, that to that one, item ID to this one, invoice ID, maybe like this. This one, and then, oh, I missed the merchant ID, but that one should go to the merchant's ID. Cool. And what's really helpful about me doing it this way is that this really confirms for me that I have a way to connect each of these tables to the other one. And so I do want to write down what the SQL is that we're going to do for each of these. So I'll just write inner join, and I want that to be red. Yep, so I'll just write inner join. I don't need to do that for all of them, but all of these arrows would be inner joins. Okay, so then for the result column, what we're looking here, what we're looking for with this result column is this is going to be our where statement. So we only want to include records that have a successful transaction. So I want where results equals success. Or it might be successful. I think I would have to double check the CSV, but that's okay. It doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, then what are we doing with quantity and unit price? I think this is, okay, yeah. So this is the last column that we haven't done anything with. Well, maybe actually let's do the merchants.star. So the reason we included this, I forget who it was, but when you said to include this, you said like, this is what we're after. This is like the end goal, right? This is, at the end of the day, we're trying to get to merchants that have earned the most revenue from me. So this is our select statement. This is what we're really trying to get to. We're trying to select all of these merchant columns. And now the big one is the invoice items, quantity, and unit price. So this is where we're going to have to calculate that revenue. So I will draw it like this. I'll just put an X in between the two to represent that we're multiplying quantity times unit price. So for an invoice item, quantity times unit price is how much revenue you've earned just from that invoice item. And now we need to start thinking about our grouping and aggregating here. So when it comes to grouping and aggregating, and I'm going to go back to that thinking about SQL queries diagram that I drew, do I need to make a calculation? And do I need multiple calculations for specific groups? So I want you all to think for yourself, what is the group that we're trying to create? We're trying to make this calculation for each something. We're trying to calculate revenue for each something. What is that? Does anyone have an idea? What are we going to group on? What are we calculating this for? What's our group that we're calculating this for? Got a couple hands up. Andrew, what do you think? You're on mute.
We want to know how much revenue one customer gives to one merchant. So since we're starting with ourselves as that one customer, we don't need to know all the rest. We can just focus on how much revenue each merchant gets from us. So we would group them by merchant ID.
Yep, you've got it. Yep. So let me actually, I'm just going to write merchant ID again, right below where we already have it, so that I can then put, oh, no, that's not what I want to go. And now let's put group. Yep. So this is our group. We want to calculate the amount of revenue earned for each merchant. So because we want the calculation to be for each merchant, we're going to group on that merchant ID. You really want to group on the ID columns almost every time. There are scenarios where you can group on the foreign key columns, but I think it is more straightforward, to me at least, if you group on the primary key columns. Thank you, Andrew. Excuse me. Okay, so we're making our calculation for each merchant, and our calculation is invoice items times unit price. That's the quantity, or that's the revenue earned for a single invoice item. So our aggregate here is going to be a sum. We want to sum the amount of revenue earned for a single invoice item for all of the invoice items for a merchant. And so I could just draw some parentheses around here. So there's our aggregate function, sum of quantity times unit price. I want you all to go back to the story text that I dropped for you. It's in the chat and the cohort channel. What are some other SQL concepts that we're going to need to include? Yeah. So I think this is everything for our specific columns, but there's still some that are not necessarily related to columns. Ryan?
We have to have an order by for the ranking and a limit.
Yeah, let's talk about the order by first. What are we ordering by?
Revenue, the sum,
Yep.
whatever the sum of the revenue after we group it by the merchants.
Yeah, so what is a way that we could identify? So it's this sum quantity times unit price. What's a way that we could identify this, this calculation here? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Like a word, like other than revenue, like a different word.
No, revenue is a good word, but how do I tell SQL, or what do I say to, what is the key word that I need to include that says, I want this thing to be called revenue?
Oh, as, like an as?
There you go. Yep, as revenue. Perfect. So in SQL, if we are doing these calculations, we can label them with the as statement, which is very, very helpful. So then we can do our order by. So what would my order by look like, Ryan?
A revenue DESC.
Yep, revenue and descending, because we want the highest first. Cool. Can I get another? You mentioned limit. Can I get another volunteer? What is our limit statement going to look like? Joey?
It'll be limit 5 in parens.
Yep, because we want the top 5 merchants. And I think that is That's looking pretty good to me. Yeah. Cool. So this diagram here is a way that I would recommend that you all, when you have these advanced SQL queries, I would recommend that you all draw something like this to just keep yourself on track of what are all the things that I'm going to need to do. As you're working through these complex SQL queries, when we have 6 tables and multiple columns from those tables, and we're grouping and aggregating and ordering and limiting and doing all of this stuff, it's really hard to keep that all in your head. We don't expect you to be able to do all of this from memory. We do expect you all to have some sort of process to be able to work through it intentionally. So this is a process that I really use as I am trying to keep all this information in my head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and I am going to drop a screenshot of this into your cohort channel. So that, or sorry, this is going to go into the code help channel. Cool. So I would recommend that you pull that up, or even just download a copy of that so you can have your reference on your end. I'm going to do the same. All right. And now, where did my whiteboard tools go? That's okay. I think we're good with the whiteboard. So now we're going to get into the good stuff, which is actually writing the active record. So let's close out all of this. All right. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go to my model tests. So because this is a story for a specific customer, I think you all have done a good job describing that in different ways. We're going from the perspective of one single customer. So for this customer, only this customer, who are those top merchants. So because the starting context here, maybe like the starting perspective is a single customer, I would, my first guess would be to create a customer instance method. So if I jump into my customer model here, I'm going to describe, instance methods. And let's describe, what do we want to call this? Probably top merchants. That would be good. And now in here, I can write out a couple of these requirements that I have. So it's, what are all the things that it should do? So it should only includes successful transactions. And I might not have this many tests, but I'm at least going to write out all the things that this query is going to need to do. So it calculates invoice item price times quantity. Maybe some edge cases here. So it does not include other customer information, something like that. Yeah, what else are we going to need to do? I don't know, it returns the top 5, something like that. Just trying to like document here and really like keep myself on track of what are all the things that I'm going to do. This might not all be 4 separate tests, but I think this is at least a good place to start. Okay, so I also want to make a before each here. I'm going to have multiple tests on this in some case. There are some edge cases, like what if it only returns top 3 if I only have transactions with 3 merchants, you know, something like this. Really good idea to, like, as you think of these edge cases, write them down. So this is an easy way that we can do that. Okay, let's set up some data here. So I'm going to need a customer. So let's say at customer equals customer.create. And this is going to be need to be, I'll just make it me. And let me just run that. So spec models, customer spec. And this probably isn't going to work because they're all skipped. So my before each won't actually run unless I have a test here. Yeah, so let's just put a do end block here and run this. Cool. So now I think it's actually running one of these tests. So I didn't get what that confirms for me is that I was able to create this customer and I didn't get any errors associated with it. Okay, let's do some more setup here. So I've got a customer. I'm gonna need, I'm probably gonna need at least 6 different merchants here. Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we make it so that, no, let's keep it simple here. Let's say at merchant1 equals merchant.create. And then the name of this merchant, let's just make it merchant1, just to be really simple here. We don't need any fancy schmancy data. So 2, 3, 4, 5, oops. 5, 6. There we go. That's looking good so far. And so then I'm going to need items for each of these merchants. So this is, let's do this. Let's go down and for each, let's do this. Say item, let's make this 1A. So the way I'm thinking about this is merchant 1's first item. So 1 is corresponding with merchant 1. And then we'll make item.create. And this is definitely easier to do if you have FactoryBot set up. I don't know if I necessarily need a name and description and all that for an item. Yeah, I think looking at my diagram here, the only purposes of the item is to connect invoice item to merchant. So I don't think I actually need anything here. I just need to say what merchant it's for. So I think I can just say merchant1.create. And if I run my test, that should give me an error if anything goes wrong. Oh, and not merchant.create, merchant.items.create. Cool. Yeah, let me do that. And that was a good example of I messed something up, but because I'm using the create bang, it threw an error and I could see that immediately. All right, let's create, so I don't know if I probably need one item, at least one item for each merchant. And I would need a couple where they have multiple items. So let's do this. Let's make item 1A, item 1B, and let's do this for all of our merchants. So each one will give them 2. We'll give them 2 items. 3, 4, 5, and our 6th merchant right here. Okay, so I've got merchants. Those merchants have items. And now I would need to create some invoice items. So I'm looking at my diagram. I'm starting at the merchants in the lower right, and I'm kind of like working backwards. So I've got items for those merchants. Now I need invoice items for those for those items. So let's say invoice item 1A equals, okay. So now I need to connect this to an invoice and an item. Okay, so I think I actually want to create some invoices first, because an invoice item is going to need an invoice and an item. So let's make invoice 1A equals invoice.create. And it needs to be associated with our customer. So rather than invoice.create, we can say at customer.invoices.create. And I think that is about all I need. If I run my test again, let me see if that throws an error. And it doesn't, so I think we're good. Yeah, so I think I want a 1A, 1B. Okay, and now as I do this, I realize that I don't need like 1A, 1B, all that, because there's only one. No, this makes sense. So this will be, how do I want to do this? So now that I'm like starting to get a little bit further, I think I'm going to need to make some comments in here. So I'm going to need to say, let's actually make this like no, let's make this invalid invoice. So we have this invalid invoice here, and it's going to be invalid because we're not going to create any successful transactions. So for this one, let's call this just regular invoice 1. It'll equal at customers.invoices.create. That looks good. And then we'll say, I spelled invoice wrong. After that, we can say invoice1.transactions.create. And then here we'll be sure to say result is success. And as I do that, I'm pretty sure that I haven't set up my enum in my transaction table. So let me just do that. Enum results. And we'll do success. And if I look at my transactions CSV, yes, it is success and failed. So let me just copy those. So 0 is success, failed is 1. Cool. I think that should work just fine. Let's check it. So let's run the test and see if we get any issues. No errors there. So I think we're still good. So we've got a successful invoice. We've got an invalid invoice. So what I'm thinking is for this invalid invoice, let's just make it so that this has a huge number of revenue. So let's make it, let's make this item 6A. Actually, let's do this. Invalid, let's do invoice, I can't decide. Invalid invoice dot invoice items dot create. And it's going to refer to, let's pick item 1A. So we'll say, yeah, let's pick item 1A here. So item is at item 1A. And then here's where I can say quantity is 1, and then maybe unit price is 1. I don't know if you've seen the syntax in Ruby before, but this is how you can kind of create a number with commas. They're not exactly commas. You can't put commas just syntactically, but this is nice. So this is going to be $1 million. Actually, let's make it, yeah, let's make a quantity of 10. So this is a $10 million invoice item here, but because it's on an invalid invoice, it should not include this. So this would mean that merchant 1A has a lot of revenue, or sorry, merchant 1 has a lot of revenue. So let's just take this out and let's write some comments here. lots of revenue, but no successful transactions. So that's going to be the first part of my test, or the first big thing that I'm testing. This merchant should not be in my output because it doesn't have any successful transactions. Okay, so I think that's looking good. So then now let's make some valid invoices. So let's actually make this invoice 2 just to match up with customer or merchant 2. So we've got invoice 2, customer invoice that create, invoice 2, transactions that create results successful. Okay, so now I think I need to add in some invoice items here. So we'll say invoice. And I probably want to make some of these instance variables, but I can worry about that later. Invoice 2 dot invoice items dot create. And this is going to be item at item. Let's make this item 2A here. Quantity of, let's make this just quantity. Let's make it easy enough on us. So let's say quantity 1, unit price of 10. So that's going to be $10 there. And then let's also do another invoice item on this same invoice. Yeah, so invoice 2 is also going to have, let's make this a quantity 10 and unit price of 1. So both of these generate $10 in revenue. So invoice 2 should have generated us $20 in revenue. So let's just say that, $20 in revenue here. So we've used item 1A, we've used item 2A and 2B. Let's now go to, let's make another invoice. So I think we can go ahead and copy this. So let's make an invoice 3. Change all of these to invoice 3. Result is successful invoice items that create. And let's make this item 3A and item 3B. And let's also do, let's actually make this invoice item 3A. So I've handled the case where we have 2 invoice items on one invoice. Let's do something very similar. And rather than, yeah, let's do something very similar. So let's actually make 2 invoices here for 3A and 3B. They're both successful. One of them is going to have item 3A, one of them is going to have item 3B. And so this should still generate $20 in revenue. So let's bump this up. Let's make this 10 there. So this would be $110 in revenue. And let's be specific here. This is for merchant 3, and this one was for merchant 2. Yeah, so I've handled the case where a invoice has multiple invoice items where, okay, let's do something else here. So let's, actually, let's just keep going. I think that these are all good examples here. So then let's just do something for merchant number 4. So we don't know how many it's going to be yet, but let's just change all of these to 4. And let's just make this a small amount here. So let's just make this $2 here. So this is $2 for merchant 4. Merchant 5, I think we can do something similar here. And let's make this, I don't know, let's make this 1515, and then this would be $10 for merchant 4. And I really don't want this to like match up with anything that I already have. Cool, let's do number 6. So this is going to be merchant number 6. And I changed this one by accident, didn't mean to do that. Oh, and I need to change this number here too for merchant 5. And so it looks like this is going to be now $12 for merchant 4. So what I'm seeing right now with the way I've set it up is that I have I have only 5 merchants with valid transactions. So I'm going to make a 7th one. I'm going to make a merchant 7 here, just so it can pick between, just so there's 6 that have successful transactions that it can pick between. And I think what I want to do here, oh yeah, I'm going to have to do all the other stuff for it too. So I've got a merchant 7. Let's make a item 7, which is going to be at merchant 7.items.create. And I think what I want to do here is rather than create a new invoice, I want to just use that invoice that we already have and add another merchant's items to it. So invoice items.create. Item is going to be at item 7. Quantity. Let's try and make this 50. So let's do 60. 20 unit price 3. So we got 20 of 3 items. So this would generate $60 for merchant 7. There we go. Okay, so I'm getting really close here. Let me run all of this test here. Validation failed, item must exist, customer spec line 41. Yeah, so this is where I'm running into some trouble with my instance variables. For my top merchants, I don't think I'm going to need, I think I'm just going to need the merchants to be instance variables. I think all the other ones can be probably the customer too. So we'll take out that one. So I think it's just all the at items have those ats on them. So we'll just take all those out. And now I think we can do, let's just do this for it returns the top 5. And take out the do end for this one. Don't know exactly what those tests would look like, but I think I know what this one. So I think this would be expect at customer dot top merchants dot to equal. And now let's look up the data that I've set up. So the one that's earned the most revenue should be, it looks like this is merchant 3. So my return value should be at merchant underscore, and then let's actually just duplicate that a couple times. So now I just need to fill in with these numbers who all of my top merchants are. So it looks like 3 is first. So it's 110. Then I think 60 is merchant 7 is the next one. Then 20, I think is the next highest one that I see, which is merchant 2. So 3, 7, 2. And then I think $20 is next. Oh wait, no, that's the one I just did. $20, then 12, and then 10, I think. So 4, then 5. And so then we are leaving out merchant 1 because of the successful transactions, because they don't have any successful transactions, and merchant 6.
Brian, you have merchant 6 labeled as 4.
Right here. Oh, yes, you're right. Oh, gotcha. So $12 should be this one right here. And then $10 is merchant 5. Yes, that looks right. And so the one we're leaving out is merchant 4. They only earned $2. That looks good. And then I think what I want to do is also just add in another invalid invoice. So I did the scenario where one merchant doesn't have any valid invoices, but what if they have an extra, what if they have one valid and one invalid? So something like invoice 6C equals at customer.invoices.create. This one is not going to have any invalid, so no successful transactions. And then we can say here, let's create some invoice items for it. So item invoice 6C dot invoice items dot create item 6A, and then let's just make this like 60 and 1 million. We probably just need to make it 1 and 1 million. So if it did include this calculation, then merchant 6 would jump to the top. So we should not see that. So that's a nice test here. So as I'm writing out this test, what I'm feeling is that I'm not actually like writing separate tests for all these edge cases. I'm actually writing those edge cases within the setup data itself. All right, that was a little bit of a slog. That took me longer than I was expecting. I'm gonna go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back at 10:20, and I'll start writing the actual code for it, getting into the really good stuff. So come back at 10:20. And if you're interested in still following along, I'm just going to push this up to GitHub. Eh, 2102. All right. As you are coming back from your Palm, I will direct you to the code help channel. I did drop, I pushed this code up to GitHub into just like a new repo and made it available for you all. So if you want to clone it down and see what I've done so far, it's there. And I will also push up the code that I write for the actual query once we get that working as well. Yeah. I'll give everybody a couple more seconds to get back on.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's up?
For, I think it was merchant 7, you used merchant 6's invoice, and it sounded like you did it on purpose. Can you explain that?
For merchant 7.
Line 83.
Yes. So I could have just done the similar pattern that I've already been doing, create a new invoice. But what I was noticing as I was going through this was for each merchant, I was creating, for each invoice, I was only including items from one merchant. So for example, for number 5, I only had merchant 5's items. And then for number 6, I only had merchant 6 items. But then I realized maybe it's also important to include items from multiple merchants on the same invoice. So that's why I did that there.
Okay.
Does that answer that?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, and part of what I'm doing as I'm looking through this is I'm looking at my diagram. I'm seeing the conceptual things that I'm going to need to do, and I'm trying to write tests that tackle all of those things. This particular relationship between invoice items and merchants is like kind of tricky because it involves 4 tables between invoices, invoice items, and merchants. So yeah, it's trying to just think through all the possible scenarios. And what I would expect is as I'm developing this, I come up with new scenarios. Probably don't want to get too deep into edge cases for this example. Any other questions about what I've done so far? I understand it might just be a lot to wrap your head around at once. All right, so now the big finale, we're going to actually write some SQL here. And we're actually going to run a test. I guess we're writing ActiveRecord, but we are going to write SQL. Okay, so first thing I need to do is clear up some errors because I haven't run my tests in a while. Customer spec line 86. Undefined method invoice. Yeah, customer.invoices.create. Undefined method. Okay, so now I'm actually getting an error for my method. So undefined method top merchant for customer. So I'm going to split the screen and go to customer.rb and make my method here. So def top merchant and try to clear that first error. And now we get expected this, but got nil because my method is empty. Okay, so I'm ready to start. Doing this. So I would really recommend that you all pull open the diagram that I drew with the tables and the columns that we made in the first part of class. That's what I'm going to be looking at to do this. I'm not going to try and keep all of this in my head. I really want something to keep my eyes on the prize, so to speak. So the first thing that I need to tackle is joining all of these tables together. So I know I'm going to need a customer's invoices, and from there I want all the other tables. So looking at my diagram, invoices is kind of like the fork in the road to get to both transactions and invoice items. So I could write some code in here to join all the way to merchants. So from customers, invoices, invoice items, and merchants, join all of those together. But then I might lose the transactions. I kind of like go past that fork in the road if I join all the way to merchants. So I'm going to start with invoices in here. So because I'm in an instance method, I can look at this instance of customers' invoices. And then from there, I need to join to both merchants and transactions. So once I say invoices.joins here, this is joining from the invoices table. Andrew pointed this out earlier, but we're only working with one customer. We're not working with several customers. So we don't need to include all the customers in our join table. We're really just including all the other tables. So as soon as I say invoices.joins, I'm joining from the invoices table, which means I should open up my invoice model to see what associations I have in here. So because an invoice has many transactions, I should be able to just say invoice.joins transactions. And I'm going to run the test and see if that gives me an error. So as you're working through these active record queries, a lot of times TDD falls short because with active record, we're really executing one big SQL statement. We're not really doing things piece by piece. So what I'm looking for here is not necessarily that my test is passing, but I'm just looking to see if it gives me an error on that join. So it would say something like, can't join to this, or invalid join syntax or something like that. But I didn't see that, so this looks successful so far. The next thing that I need to do is I need to join to from invoices to merchants. So I would recommend that as you are, as you're working through this, you open up Active Record Query Interface. You don't need to do that for this class, but this has a lot of really good information in here. It is the Rails 6 version, so to be really good about this, I would want to go to my specific Rails version, so Rails 5.2. And then from here, look for the query interface. And so now I don't get that banner in the top right here of Rails 6. And then down here on joining tables, it'll walk me through some of this syntax here. And so what I'm going to be using is using array hash name of nested associations. So I'm going to be doing this right here, joining multiple associations, or in English, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so I'm going to actually do both of these. I'm going to join multiple associations and join nested associations. So the first thing is the multiple associations. I need to join to both transactions and I need to join to merchants. But I can't just say in here, I can't just say joins merchants because my invoices model does not have an association to merchants. So if I ran this, it should say something like, can't join invoice to association named merchants, perhaps you misspelled it. So I can't go directly from invoices to merchants, but what I could do with invoices is I could go to invoice items. So let's just do that, invoice items. And run this. And I don't get any error for that, which is just great. I think this would probably be helpful as well. Let me just do this. Open. Didn't save that. That is not what I was expecting to happen. Okay, let me do this. Sorry, y'all, technical difficulties, 1 second. Yeah, this is not working. That's okay, I'll just keep going. Okay, so I've joined to my transactions and my invoice items. So if you're looking at that diagram, what I've done so far is I've essentially gone from customers to invoices, And then invoices is my fork in the road. So I've gone up and down to get to transactions and invoice items. So this is the syntax for kind of splitting, going through multiple associations. And then from here, I would need to tell it, okay, now that we're on the invoices or invoice items, now we need to get to items and merchants. So the syntax for that, if I go to invoice items, oops, not CSV. I can actually do, rather than this symbol syntax, I can use keyword argument syntax to get to invoice items item. So all of this together says join to transactions and join to item through invoice items. And notice that I'm using that word through, just like we would have with a many-to-many. And it doesn't give me any errors with that. So I think I'm still good. Andrew, do you have a question?
Yeah, so this idea of joining a table through another table, is that different from just joining all the tables together? Like if I do this, am I going to have full access to all the stuff in invoice items, or is it saying, or am I telling the computer, you don't need to look at everything in invoice items, just the part that joins the stuff together?
No, it would give me access to everything in all of these tables. So I have access to transactions, invoice items, and item. I have all of that.
Okay.
Yep, good question. Aiden.
Can you explain a little bit more about when you're using a comma to join, like transactions to invoice items, versus the keyword argument way of doing it?
Yes. Yeah. So pull open the diagram that I drew with all the tables linked together. The first one here, invoices.joins transactions, takes me from invoices to transactions. That's kind of like the simplest join you can do. That's what we've done before in class. The second one is some new syntax. And what this says is this joins from invoices to invoice items, and then from invoice items, join to item. So it's joining, this syntax is joining, let me just take out transactions because that is not related to this. This is joining invoices, invoice items, and items together. It's joining all of them. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Ryan?
I get a little lost sometimes with the, like when it's plural and not, like an invoice item belongs to an item, right? But yet there's a singular item with multiple invoice items.
Yeah, so an invoice item belongs to one item, an item has many invoice items. So if you're going from invoice item, it's belongs to item. But if we were joining from the other direction, like we were starting with merchants, like say you were building out a merchant dashboard, you were trying to find the top customers for those merchants, you would probably have to join from item to invoice items, because an item has many invoice items. So this is all about associations. If we're going, this syntax is join from invoices to invoice items. And then when we're on invoice items, we need to look in the invoice item model for what associations it has. That's why it's item, not items.
So one way you could double check is you should never, in this nested relationship, you would never have an items, or would you, in maybe a different type of relationship, but as long as it's related to invoice items right here, you would never have a plural items. It will always just be item.
So as an example, if I started with merchant, I could joins based on whatever associations are in merchant.rb. And I see that it has many items. So from here, I would joins to items. And
Gotcha,
then if I
thanks.
wanted to then go to invoice items from this, I would pull open my item model and see that it has many invoice items. So that syntax would be joins items, invoice items. So this second association is kind of using the first one as the stepping stone. So if items is my stepping stone, I need to go into my item model and see what can I join to from there. But we're not doing that version. So this gets me from invoices to invoice items to items, but we're trying to go all the way to merchant. So we need to then get to those merchants from those items. So then I can look in here, and this shows me some syntax for joining to nested associations, multiple levels. And so that's where I'm getting the syntax from. So I think what I actually want to do here is joins from, and I'm going to take out the transactions for now. That one's pretty straightforward. I want to join to invoice items, and then I want to join to item, and then from item, I want to join to merchant. Because looking in my item model, it belongs to a merchant. So let me run that and see if that gives me any syntax errors. And it did not give me any errors, so I think I'm good. This syntax here, I believe, joined me from my one customer to their invoices, to their invoice items, to their items, to their merchants. Excuse me. Andrew?
Right. So this, kind of illustrates how I can get a nice long chain. And the previous one showed how you can start with one thing and then branch off in two different directions. And maybe have a chain going in one direction and a chain going in another direction. But what if you have something where you need to have like a nice long chain, and then it branches off in that direction, and then another one branches off over here. So you have like three different branches from three different points, and you can't just have one thing that's like at the center of all the branches. Am I making sense?
Yes, I think so. Let me see if this answers it. So if I have, let me just duplicate this line of code. So if invoice items actually had two associations, so maybe like, let's just totally make something up here. I keep going to the CSV. Let's say an invoice item also belongs to a unicorn. I don't know. Let's just for something different. Let's say has many unicorns. There we go, something like this. So if my invoice item is kind of like my fork in the road, and I wanted to join to two things from there, I could do that in an array. So I could say join to, let's actually just take out this nested one. I could say join to both item and unicorns in here. And that would be my like sort of fork in the road. That's how I would do that.
And then could you like put next to the item, put another kind of bracket, curly bracket thing, and have a whole long chain, and the same for unicorn?
Exactly. Yep. So then from item, if item then had another thing I wanted to join to, I could go to the merchant from there, and the unicorns could join to something else, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. You can combine all of these syntaxes, and I don't expect you all to come out of this knowing the syntax perfectly just by watching me do it. But the point is, between these hash syntax and array syntax, you can join any tables to any other tables just with some interesting syntax. Let's keep going here, and let's join. So this will join me from invoices to invoice items to item to merchant. So I think that is as far as we need to go. Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my customer spec, and I want to pry in here. Do I want to do that? No, not really. I don't really want to pry in there. I think I'm okay. Okay, so this will give me all of those tables. And then I also want to throw in my transactions association as well. So this is what I've highlighted is one big long chain of joining. And then this is another smaller chain of joining. So invoices is my fork in the road, and these are my two forks. So 1 and 2 here. Okay, so thinking through my SQL query, looking at my diagram, I think I've joined all the tables together. So now I think I just need to throw in my other statements in here. So I have where results is success. So let's see if that works. This is a transactions column. So let's see if it just automatically knows that that's a transaction column. And it's syntax error. It doesn't like my syntax. Is it just the multi-line that it's not liking? Nope, still doesn't like this syntax. But it was working without the dot where, right? No, it wasn't. What did I do wrong? Oh, customer, wait. Syntax error, customer line 5. If I just comment this out. Yeah, something about this line, there's a syntax error. It was working before I put transactions in there. Yeah. Can I just put transactions at the beginning here? There we go. I don't know what was wrong with my other syntax there. I might have needed to wrap everything in curly brackets again, but this is working, so I'm not going to complain too much. So now branch number 1, branch number 2. Okay, so now let me try to do my where result is success. Yeah, so it's not smart enough here. It says PG undefined column error, column invoices dot result does not exist. So because I'm starting with invoices, it's assuming this result is for an invoice. So I can do this transactions. This syntax will explicitly put this where on the transactions table. So hopefully that clears that error. And it looks like it did. So I don't have an error for that. So there's my where statement. Just going through the rest of this diagram, I'm going to need to group on my merchant's ID. So let's do that as, let's just do a string here and let's say merchants.id. And I'm going to need to group and aggregate at the same time. So I think I'm also going to need to write a select statement here. So I have my select statement in my diagram that is, I want merchants.star. And here's where I can put my aggregate. So I can sum quantity, and let's be explicit, invoice items dot quantity times invoice items dot unit price as revenue. Whew, that is a long select statement. Let's take this out for now. Let's run that and see if that gives me any errors. No errors there. So I think I can finish this up. I think I can order, let's do revenue. Let's see if it actually works like this. I kind of doubt it. I think we might run into the same thing we did with the results where it says revenue is not a column on invoices. But we'll see. Oh, no, it didn't have any problem with that. Okay, cool. So ordering by the revenue descending, limit by 5. And yeah, I'm just looking through my diagram and seeing if there's anything that I missed. I think we've got everything here. So let me run this test. And I can see from my output here that I'm getting back, or I want to get back merchants, but what I actually got back was invoices. So because we started with invoices here, it is treating this as, an invoice model. So it's modeling these as invoices. So if I pry in here, I can double check that. So a lot of times the RSpec output is like kind of hard to read. So we can just do at customer.top merchant. I probably want to rename that to top merchants, but I won't fuss about it too much. So I get back a bunch of, what does my toSQL say? Yeah, it is selecting merchants.star. Oh, it's selecting ID created at and updated at, or it's showing me those because an invoice also has those. Okay, so can I call .first.name on this? And this is merchant 3. Okay, and I did expect to get merchant 3 back. Is my second one merchant 2, or sorry, merchant 7? It is. Okay, so I think the problem is that it's expecting merchant objects, but it's getting back invoice objects. So I don't really care about what type of object they are. I care about what data is stored on them. So I think what I'm going to do is just take these top merchants and map all of them to their names. So expected is this array of my customers, or wait, no, this is my actual. So the actual result is we'll take this method call and we'll make sure that all the names are the correct names. And then let's also do the same thing with this expected array. So let's say expected equals this array dot map to merchant.name. I probably could just throw a dot name on all of these, but just for time's sake. And then we'll say expect actual to equal expected. And now my test is passing. So that was it. I got everything working, but I don't really love this syntax for joining. So it is important to know how to join these tables together because or do some of these nested associations because you are going to have to do that. But one thing that I could do here is rather than if I go back to the start here where I'm starting with invoices, so I'll open up my invoice model and I'm trying to join on associations in here. I have transactions and I have invoice items, but what I could do is I could just write some more associations in my invoice model. So an invoice has many invoice items and an invoice item has many items. So I could say that an invoice has many items through invoice items. And because an item belongs to a merchant, I could say it has many merchants through items. And so then, so I've been saying like, oh, when we're joining on association. So if we need another association, just go make it. So I should be able to do exactly what I've done here in this statement with merchants. So now my two paths become a little bit more clear. I'm joining to transactions and I'm joining to merchants, and I get to merchants through items, through invoice items, etc. Well, so that was a little bit of refactoring. Let's see if it works. And it does. It works. Ryan?
It seems that I'm making most of my mistakes around this group and select on line 7 and 8. So does it matter which one comes first? It seems like you immediately, when you did a dot group with merchants.id, you were like, okay, this has to be part of an aggregate. And that's because in order to display the items, you have to have the, almost like another column, like revenue, right?
To display the I think you said items, but I think I would say to display the merchants.
Right.
You would need another column. Yeah, exactly. So if you think back to that grouping and aggregating video, where when I see a group by statement, I'm like separating out the columns, I'm making the groups of that data. You need to condense all of that data into a single value. And I think that's what you're getting at, Ryan. You need to, when you are making groups like groups of merchants, you need some way to say what is the single value that is associated with that group. So each group can only have one value associated with it. So I want that value to be this revenue calculation. So that's why in my mind, I say, well, if I'm going to make this group, I need to have some sort of calculation for that group. Another way of saying that is you can't group without aggregate. Every time you group, you have to aggregate. If you're grouping, but you're not aggregating, you're probably doing something wrong, or you're thinking about it the wrong way.
If the select was above the group here, would this still work?
Yeah, so all of these are not calculation methods like pluck or order or sum. So what that means is that they can all be just completely interchanged. So I could put the select up there. I could put the limit right here. I could put the order above the group. I could do these all in any order. I think the whoops, not get status. And it's still passing. So the only one that needs to be in order is, actually, does my joins even need to be in order? Yeah, that'll work. The only thing that needs to come first is invoices, because that's like the starting point. But all the other ones are interchangeable. Alexander?
I noticed that you're still getting access to invoice items, even though you don't specifically join that. Are you getting access to everything in between invoices and merchants with the current syntax?
Yes. Let me undo this so just to put my joins back up at the top. Yes, because so the way this works is we start with invoices, and then we say, let's ignore this transactions part for a second. Start with invoices, joins merchants. So what ActiveRecord is going to do is it's going to look in the invoices model for an association called merchants, and it sees it right there. But it also sees that that goes through items, and it sees that items goes through invoice items. And it sees that invoice has a direct relationship to invoice items. So because all of those associations go through each other, yes, all of those get joined together and we have access to all of them. So that's maybe one disadvantage of this syntax, is that you can't see anything explicit that says we are joining all of these tables together. It is definitely shorter, less typing, but it does kind of abstract away some of those details. Brisa?
It's not really a question, but it's more of an ask. Can you read this method to us in technical terms? Like, I want to know how to explain this.
Sure.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and are you thinking more of like Ruby syntax or SQL?
Not Ruby syntax. For example, we have the customers and we're joining to the invoices table where we have access to. So it kind of like, I want to know how you would explain this.
Sure, I'll give it my best shot. Okay, so for our top merchant method, we need to, we're going to first call, so we're inside an instance method, and we're going to call this method called invoices. So this right here is going to see the, when we call invoices, it's going to see that a customer instance has many invoices. So it's going to use that association to create that relationship to those invoices. Under the hood, it's matching invoice customer ID foreign key to customer primary key. But the ActiveRecord association abstracts away some of those details. From that relationship to all the invoices, we can join that to all of our other tables. So we have a direct relationship from invoices to transactions. An invoice has many transactions. And then it has a relationship to merchants through, if I go over here, through items, and items through invoice items, and it has many invoice items. So under the hood, ActiveRecord is going to do an inner join between invoices, invoice items, and merchants to complete this one line of code right here, which is joins merchants. And I could also do this just to make this a little bit more clear. I could just write these joins as two separate joins if that maybe like makes, oops, I just said join. Joins. hopefully I can do this. Yep, I can do that. So if that like helps it make a little bit more sense in your mind. And then from there, we're chaining on 5 active record methods. All of these methods are interchangeable, so the order doesn't really matter for them. But from this, from all of these joined tables of data, we want to get the merchant object and all of the revenue associated with that merchant object, which is going to be the sum of all of the invoice items quantity times the invoice items price. And we want to group by that merchant ID. So this calculation will happen for each merchant. So we're going to sum invoice items and quantity, but only for invoice items that match this merchant. We only want 5 results back, so we're limiting it to 5. This where statement will limit rows to where the transaction result is successful, so that will limit or filter out any unsuccessful transactions. And after we do all of that calculation, we can order the what we have aliased as revenue. So as revenue aliases this calculation. So then we can refer to it down here to order all of our merchants by that revenue descending, and that gives us our top 5 merchants.
Thank you. I think the part that I was missing was like on line 5 that you're calling the method of invoices. It's good to just reference that because I've never used that terminology.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So just in general in Ruby, if you just have a word, that doesn't count. If you just have a word, so like there's no quotes around it, or there's no colon at the front, or it's not a number. If you just have a word, Ruby sees this as a local variable or method. So what I mean by local variable or method is that if I created a variable like this, like I just say invoices equals 0, Ruby would probably see invoices as this local variable. And it would give me a lot of weird, it can't join to integer 0. So just a word is a local variable or method. So if I don't have a local variable like this, or even like this, if something was passed in as a local variable, that would also count. But if I don't have a local variable, it's going to look for a method, and our active record associations create methods that we can call on our instances. So this is going to see this association as a method and call that method. And what that method does is it finds all of the invoices where the customer ID is this customer's ID. Cool. So Ryan, I see you have a hand up. I'll definitely get to your question. Just for a little bit of, just to like set the table for the rest of the morning, what I wanted to do was work through a story front to back for you so you could see like all the things that could be involved with working through one of these complex active record stories. It did take me a little longer than I had anticipated. We got some really good questions, but I really did want to like show you everything between the testing and whatnot. The rest of the morning is meant to be office hours, so we'll start with Ryan's question. But if you wanna hop off and like go implement some of this on your project, maybe you need to like Slack your team and see what you all want to do. But I'm happy to do whatever, including working on these queries with you all. If you're running into issues with your queries on your project, and Jameson is here as well, so we can do some breakout rooms and give you all some help. So whatever you all need on the project specifically, we're here to help. But yeah, let's jump into Ryan's question.
Well, if it is a little bit, I was really struggling on the extension from the project, and it's very similar to this, meaning it's calling a group and an order and a limit. But I was trying to do like an aggregate inside of the dot order, and I see with yours, you simply you didn't need to do that. You just ordered it without. It was like you have it in the select. You have a sum inside of the select statement, and that is where it should go. So I don't know if we're free to ask questions about the.
Let me try this. I think this is what you're asking. I think I should be able to, rather than putting this aggregate here, I think I could just put it in here as a string and say order by this calculation descending. Yeah, you can do that as well. Yeah, there's, and I think this came up in our grouping and aggregating class, but you can put the calculation directly in the order statement. I really don't know if there's any difference. I've tried to like Google a little bit and I haven't found anything, but this is passing my test, so I wouldn't really think too hard about it.
Yeah, I think I got it to pass too. The only thing I was getting was a saying in Rails 6 that this will be a deprecated, or you won't be allowed to call, because I was using count with a star in the parentheses, and it's saying that in Rails 6 that won't be allowed.
So then maybe what I had it as before is the quote unquote correct way to do it. That's not what I wanted. Yeah, there we go. So that's what we had that was working, but then it looks like we could write it like this as well, but this is not preferred. Yep. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and take a palm, and I'm going to come back in about 5. And yeah, if you have a question, feel free to put your hand up, and I'll get back to them. All right, I'm back online. Andrew, are you back?
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have a question?
Yeah. I am having trouble figuring out how to get ActiveRecord to actually give me the stuff that I want, or get return the values I want in a format that I can use. Sometimes it seems to want to give me an array that's full of different, objects that I can run methods on. And it's a neat little array, so I can do .each and, print them out on the page nice and neatly. At other times, it's like, nope, you don't get that. I have no idea what I'm getting, and I'll try to specify what I want, and I just don't get the rhyme or reason as to when it gives me an array that I can work with, when it gives me a Ruby object that I can manipulate, and when it gives me just I don't know how to get it to give me the stuff I want it to give me at any given time. It's like completely hit or miss.
Yeah. So the first thing I wanna say to that is this is why it's important to understand SQL, or it's important to continue to talk about SQL as we talk about ActiveRecord, because in SQL you only get back data that you are selecting. So that would be the first thing I would point you to. If you aren't getting back the data that you want, check out your select statement, or if you don't have a select statement, just look at the SQL for your method. So for instance, if I pry in here, if I say it's just not giving me back what I want, I could pry in here and I could look at customer.top_merchant.toSQL, and then I could print that out. And this can definitely be intimidating as you're looking through a really big SQL query, but this will show me that I am selecting merchants.star, which should include my merchant data. So that would be the first thing that I would check at the SQL level. Make sure that you are selecting the data that you want to get back. If I took out select, maybe if instead of merchants.star, I did merchants.id and ran this, I would get an error, and it would say undefined method name for this invoice object on line 92. So right here, when I try to call merchant.name, it's not letting me do that because I haven't selected the name column. If I look at my SQL now, and actually I'd have to pry before this because my error is on line 92. So I'll pry before it and do a similar thing, puts at customer.top_merchant.toSQL. I'll see now that I'm only selecting merchants.id. So I can't call .name on something that I don't have access to. So that would be the first thing that I would check, is that you're selecting the data that you're trying to access. And then the second thing is pay attention to what ActiveRecord methods you're calling. Pretty much every time you're doing a joins and every time you do a joins, you're going to get back some sort of array, more specifically an ActiveRecord relation. So you are going to get back arrays of objects. And so you're going to have to do some sort of manipulation, like each over that array, or maybe it's grab the first thing out of that array if you're only expecting one thing back. Certain ActiveRecord methods will return different things based on what method you are using. So any of your calculation methods, like .sum. So if I try to do a .sum rather than summing in the select statement, it would give me back, well, actually, let's just do it. Let's do .sum invoice items .this, something like that, rather than put it in my select statement. So let's just comment it out. Actually, let's just do it like this. So if I changed it to that and pry it in here, let's do at customer.top_merchant. And now I can't order. Let me just take out the order. Do that again. customer.top merchant. So if I change this to a .sum, this is going to give me back a raw array or a raw hash of IDs pointing to those revenue calculations. And we can even see these are the numbers that I set up in my test data. So any of your calculation methods are going to return just raw data rather than objects. And a little bit of a nuance there is .pluck is one of your calculation methods. So if you're including .pluck somewhere, like I'm trying to pluck name, I don't think this would work for this query. This is, rather than active record objects, this will return an array of this data. So in this case, a string of the names, or if I said like pluck unit price, this would probably return me an array of integers, something like that. So just to kind of summarize, let me do some notes here. Calculations, for example, sum, pluck, average, return raw data. So think like strings, integers, hashes. So calculations return those types of methods. Methods like find by. So there are certain methods will return a single object. So for instance, this is like find. So when you do a find in active record, this will just grab that one object. Find by will do something similar. Those are really the only two that I can think of as find and find by. And then I'll just say most other methods return an active record relation. So that is your array of objects. Andrew, is that helpful? And do you have an example that you want to take a look at?
Well, yeah, that would probably be a good idea. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Over here, I know I'm playing around with it in controller. That's just where I'm playing around with it for now. I'll move it where it belongs later.
Yeah, that's fine. That's a perfectly valid way of developing. Like, let's just get it to work, and then we can worry about MVC moving it around.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to I'm into this problem where like if I comment out the where statement and I run this, then I get an active records relation, and this is the first item inside of that active records relation. So I have like there and there. It seems to be doing exactly, it is returning me, a table with invoice items joined to invoices, and that's all good. But the instant I add this where, and I've tried to limit it to just one invoice, then, and I run this, it breaks, and it's telling me that I'm missing a from clause. Not entirely sure what that means. I assume that means that for some reason it stops recognizing this table that I'm joining as something it can draw from, and I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah, let me see if I can help you understand this error a little bit, because that's what that's probably.
I've seen this error a lot.
Yeah. So when you say from clause entry, from is our statement that tells us what table we're working with. Right. So the way I would read this is missing from clause entry for table invoice. Essentially, that's saying it doesn't know what the invoice table is. It doesn't have a table called invoice. So do you have a table called invoice?
Well, we have invoices.
Exactly.
So it needs to be plural.
So because the where statement was the thing that kind of like gave us this error, I wouldn't change anything about the joins. It seems like the joins is working. Yeah.
Okay, that helps a lot.
So that where statement, yeah, this is definitely like a little confusing. This join statement right here, when we're joining, it's looking for an active record association. So that's where you go into your invoice item model and you'll see that it belongs to invoice. But over here, we're not referring over there in the where statement, we're not referring to a association, we're referring to a table name. So that's why one of them is singular, one of them is plural. One of them refers to an association, one of them refers to the table name in our database.
Okay, yeah, I was really confused by all of that because like when I comment out this, and if I do this and I try to run it, then oh, that doesn't work. Okay,
syntax there.
Delete the whole thing. Then I get what looks like an active record thing. And I think if I like use Pride to look into it, it looks good. So things look fine until I try to treat it as if it's a list of things that I can manipulate. And so that's why I was confused about why isn't this returning a list? It seems to be returning the right data that I want. I just can't access it as a list, which I need to do if I'm going to iterate over it. So that's why I thought the problem was about what it's returning in terms of like lists versus not lists and stuff. So I don't know if this is going to solve all of my problems, but it'll certainly solve one of them.
Yep, and on to the next problem, right? Yeah, I think one thing that's really important about this process, like just as a general strategy, I think that you did a great job of like, okay, let's take a step back and let's see what is working. That joins to invoice is working. And then when you add in the where, that kind of breaks things. So I would use that strategy to say, well, if adding in this where statement is what broke, this kind of makes me think, okay, the error is most likely somewhere in this syntax. So that's why I would avoid messing with your joins, because it looked like that was already working. Yeah, so that's just like a general strategy you can use in programming in general. It's a very good strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank
right,
you.
Andrew.
I'll
welcome.
let other people ask their questions.
Yeah, let me know when you get to your next problem.
Okay.
Let's go to Ryan.
Okay, so I'll share. Oh, I feel like there's Andrew's still sharing, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. So I'm so stubborn, I can't move on until I figure this out. So this is after on working on the IC, I got to like, this returned me an array, but not the array I wanted. So I wanted to return the ingredients the chef used most often in the dishes. So I just naturally thought group by ID, and then I settled on this, and this is where I was getting this deprecation warning about using the count, but even then it still is not necessarily ordering what I want. And if I put, well, first off, I guess I don't want to spend a lot of time if you can just see something off the front that I'm messing up.
I think the first thing I would want to double check is that this is the right order. So popularity is just the number of times they've used that ingredient, right?
Correct. And
yeah, so like keep going.
Well, I was just going to say the way that I've always been able to at least ensure that I'm close is if I come into here and I'm in chef. So if I just type ingredients, I get kind of the way I set up my test. I can see that the frequency of number 4 should be, no, not number 4, ingredient 2 should be the highest frequency, which is flour.
And then all the dishes.
Right, so there's 4 flours, there's 3 pepperonis, and number 5 is there's 2 carrots. So I can be fairly confident that 2 should become before 3 and 3 before 5. So like a lot of the, like So I'm expecting flour, pepperoni, and carrot, but even with this one here, where I group by ID, and then I do a count of all in the order of descending, I'm always getting flour first, but I seem to be getting sausage second, which only it gets used once, and pepperoni comes last. So when I look at this, I notice this one thing that hops out to me is a lot of times I see this active record association, but I just see an array here when I hit ingredients, which I guess is maybe normal, but it looks like I can still call any of the methods on it.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That is still, if you do like ingredients.class, you should see it's still an active record relation. It's just because we're in pry, it's not necessarily showing that. Oh, it's actually active record associations collection proxy, but we won't dig too deep into that. I think what I want you to do is grab that line 8 from your model, which is the code that you're running. Can you just drop it into pry here? And there's our issue. So ingredient, we do not want pepperoni. We want pepperoni to be the second. Okay, yeah. Can you do a .2? Oh, you can't do a .2 SQL on it because you're plucking the name. Yeah. Can you do a can you take off the .pluck? And can you do a .2 SQL? So the only thing I'm not sure of is you say group by ID. What ID is that picking up?
Do you want me to do like a puts on it?
No, yeah. And I think I see something that doesn't quite look right to me. What is it grouping on?
After the class today, I tried to refactor it to this. Sorry, I was going to try to make this more readable from the put statement. But I tried making it like this from the class, and this is still giving me a bunch of problems like this, where I call the ingredient.name and then account. I think this isn't necessarily failing altogether, but it's still not working. So I'll, yeah, if you have, I can continue to fix this SQL.
No, let's keep working through it. One thing that I wasn't sure of was, or the thing that I wasn't sure of is if you go back down to the bottom where you had pasted the SQL, I wasn't sure about that group by. Trying to highlight.
Oh, I see.
The group by, but group by ingredients.id does make sense to me. We want to make a group of ingredients and then just do a count for each one of them. Maybe one thing we could check here is, yeah. So this is one reason why I don't love to use pluck, is because we just lose a lot of other data. Could you change? What do I want to do here? Gradient count. Yeah, what I want to do is take the code that you wrote. Actually, let's just comment out line 7 and 8. Let's do that, because it looks okay to me. Let's run the test just as is, and I want to see what the output of these lines on 10 through 13 give us. Syntax error. Yeah, comment out your SQL down here.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then we're getting
sausage.
That's the same thing, right? That's the same issue.
Yeah, it's going in the wrong order.
Yeah. So what we can do now is let's put a pry before the expectation in your test.
The only thing I was going to say also, I guess in this one, I did not put a DESC.
Oh, yeah. Let's just do that. Let's, as we see that issue.
Is it inside or outside the quotes that I want to go?
I think you want to go inside. Yeah, inside. Yep.
Flour, sausage, pepperoni. Okay, it does look like that was the issue.
But we're still not getting
Okay,
the right
yeah, because I
answer,
think
right?
that, right, so yeah, I guess I don't know if pluck name would work here now. or
So
not.
let's put a pry before the expectation. So because we are, what I want to check now is I want to see, is it calculating correctly? Is it calculating that count of the number of times it's used that ingredient?
So I'll pry right here where I have it.
Exactly, yep. So let's call @chef.mostpopular_ingredients. Yep. So can you call .first on it to get that ingredient? First ingredient. And so because we've included ingredient count in our select statement, can you call ingredient count on that ingredient? Cool. Can we do a .second and a .third as well, just to see what it's giving for those other ones? One. And what about .third? Oh. What the heck? You're not ordering it. I'm talking to ActiveRecord, not you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like the second one has 1 and the third one has 3. So why is it not? Why is it? It's like just refusing to order it.
Right. Yeah, that I didn't even realize that. So, and because
That's
in the
odd.
array, it's got this one, this, so it's putting sausage, which only has 1 use.
Right? Is that, yeah, I only see ingredient 4 once right there.
Right.
Yeah, so it looks like it's calculating your, so what this is telling me is that your aggregate and your group are doing what you want to, but for whatever reason, ordering is not going so well. Can you do @chef.mostpopular_ingredients.toSQL?
Yeah, so @chef.mostpopular_ingredients.
And you can print that out and make it slightly more readable.
And do you want me to bring it up?
No, that's okay for me. Oh, interesting. Order by ingredients.calories, ingredient count. Do you see that?
Yeah, right here.
Do you have a scope set up in your ingredient
Oh, yes,
model?
I do. Yes.
This is why I don't use scopes. This is, I have, every time scopes come up as a topic, I always say, like, I don't love them and I can't accurately describe it. This is a perfect example.
That would have been an ingredient. Yeah, I was bragging about that scope, so now I feel like a real idiot.
No, you're not an idiot.
So if I comment this
I think just
out,
comment it out, yeah.
and then I'm not sure.
And maybe just to clarify, scopes are not so bad, but default scopes are rough because they will do things by default without you explicitly doing them. So you run into this exact scenario where you're like, why is this not working? It's not doing what I want. And you have to like go into the SQL to see like, oh, it's using my default scope. And if another developer didn't realize you had that scope set up, they would like you're the one who made it and you even forgot about it. So someone who didn't make it might not even realize it's there.
Right, yeah. I didn't realize it would take over that method too. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it looks like now that I've commented out, I'm getting pepperoni second, which I think is what I want.
Yeah, I think that looks good. The difference between Yeah, the difference between your output and what we wrote is that you're expecting back those raw names. Can you uncomment line 14 in your model to pluck the name? I think that might actually mess up your select statement, but let's just see. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can't call pluck because it says that this ingredient count no longer exists. So it basically, by having a pluck, it'll delete whatever select column you make.
Yeah, or I might say it overrides it, I think. Yeah. Yeah,
so I guess
I would just take off the dot names. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like that. You might get a slight issue because you're selecting the name in your query, but you're expecting the whole object. So yeah, it has the correct names, but then it doesn't have like ID and created at.
So if I did like a dot star here, it might help.
Yeah, I think that will do it.
All right, what a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
A lot of good stuff in there. You're welcome. Alexander, what's up?
Don't want to get on too much of a tangent, but could you give a brief overview of what scope is for and kind of what it does? And
yeah, I'll do my best. I really don't use scopes, especially not the default ones. The way you can think about the scope is, or the way that I would recommend that you think about it at first is essentially a where statement that you have to do a lot of times. That is a good use case for the scope when you have to do a where very often. So for instance, in the project, where a transaction is successful is a good example of a scope. Rather than all transactions, I only want to find successful transactions because a lot of times we just don't even care about the failed transactions. So it's a way to take a excuse me, a set of data and scope it down to a smaller set of data. Now you can use scopes to do other things like ordering the data, but I think the best use case of it is what I said. Take a big set of data, scope it down to a subset of that data, usually with a where statement.
awesome, thanks.
You're welcome. Jameson, do you have anything to add in there? Did you use scopes in practice?
I don't really have anything to add. That's exactly how I've used them in practice. Like an example would be when I worked on like a product that had a bunch of different types of users, and like the functionality depended upon what actions those users had taken. We would have a lot of scopes on those different types of user models to kind of narrow down that set before we called them in another ActiveRecord query in another class somewhere. So we didn't use any default scopes. And I think like that example we saw with Ryan's issue is probably why.
Is there, for those user scopes, what are some examples of those scopes?
Yeah, so we would have like one scope for users who had signed an NDA. For instance, it was like an interviewing platform. So if they had signed an NDA, then there would be a scope for that. Or if they had already participated in like 5 interviews that month, then they would be disqualified. So there was a scope for that. Lots of different examples. I mean, we probably had, I can think of one file where we probably had like 100 scopes. So, but it all had to do with like the state of the user and their interaction with the database. So we didn't have to call that where over and over every time we checked for their, like, every time we checked that they were authorized to do something.
Yeah, if you had 100 scopes in that model, that probably sounds like a lot, but contrast that with you're probably using each one of those scopes in multiple places. So now you're eliminating with 100 lines of code, you're eliminating potentially thousands of lines of code. If you use each one of them 10 times, you're eliminating thousands of lines of code.
Totally.
Yeah, given that, I think that scopes are oftentimes best used when I wouldn't like just make a scope starting off. I would say, oh, I'm doing this thing a lot of times. Let's refactor into a scope. So I think a scope is like a good refactoring tool, but not necessarily something I would start with. Aiden.
This is entirely off topic, but if nobody has any more ActiveRecord questions, can we talk about APIs?
Well, let me check in with Joe. Joe, do you have an active
course.
record question?
Yeah, sorry, and I just have an error that I don't quite understand. Can I show it to you real quick, and then maybe I can get out of you guys' hair?
Absolutely.
So let me get this out of the way. I'm trying to, here's my setup for my model test for that, the top 5 customers by transaction for the merchant dashboard. And everything was kind of working fine, but then I'm getting this each issue on line 23. I'm assuming this is like obviously because I'm trying to create the customer with a pre-existing list of invoices. But I've never seen this before. I'm not really sure what to do.
Interesting. So because this is happening on line 23, I'm assuming that this is a factory bot or some sort of like factory bot issue. Okay, so let's see if we can figure this out. Create customer invoice. Could you throw in a pry right before line 23?
Sure.
So it was saying undefined method each for an invoice. Could you just do at invoice? Oh, actually, can you move the pry one line below? Because I want to get access to at invoice.
I gotcha.
So can we do at invoice bracket 0, just like it is in your setup? Okay, so it didn't mind that. Can you copy line 23 and just drop it into pry?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to recreate the error and maybe try and like see how specifically I can recreate the error. I was wondering if just invoice bracket 0 was going to give us that error, but it seems like it is something with our whole factory bot create method, undefined method each for invoice. Can we go to the, on the right, could you pull up the customer factory?
Yeah.
I can fight crime.
Yeah, I think the issue here is in our customer factory, we don't have an attribute called invoices. Yeah, so I think, so a customer, what's the relationship between a customer and an invoice? A customer
I got my
has
let's
many
see.
invoices.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
should
think
be
that's
able to
what you're
missing right here.
Yeah, okay. So I don't think you're going to be able to, you could do this with FactoryBot, but I don't necessarily know how to do that. I think what you would want to do to create an invoice for this customer is,
can I show you something that I've seen Joey do? Or here, I can just show you and then you can, instead of me wasting time trying to type it all out and then it'd be a waste. Let's see, I think it's this one. Yeah, so Joey got this to work where he basically iterated over it. Do you think maybe doing this?
yeah, you could do something like that. Yeah, you can definitely do something like that. Do you understand what the problem is? There's a lot of ways we could fix it, but do you understand what the problem is?
I'm not 100%, no.
Yeah. So when you're creating a customer has many invoices. So you can't set that as an attribute, at least not with FactoryBot, or you could, but I don't know exactly what it would look like. So rather than, essentially what you're trying to do here is you're trying to create 6 customers. You're trying to create 6 customers. So you're trying to create a new customer for each one of those invoices. Can you go to the invoice factory?
Yeah. I wonder if I could do like a transient attribute. I don't know if that would work.
You know, I think it's even simpler than that. I think because this invoice factory creates a customer. So this line 4 right here says when you're creating an invoice, also create a customer. I think
So
that's
do it in reverse.
well, no, I think that it will just do it. I think this create list of invoice will create those 6 customers. So I think if you just comment out lines 23 through 28.
Mm-hmm. Well, can I, well, since the price already in there, if I call like at invoice, or maybe like invoice, I'm trying to think how to, yeah,
Invoice
it's got the
0.
customer ID.
Yeah, do
Okay,
invoice
yeah,
0
yeah.
dot customer.
It doesn't have to be customer ID, right?
Nope. As long as you have a association set up, yeah. So it's creating those
Sweet.
customers
Okay.
for you. So if you wanted to set them to variables rather than creating a new customer, just do dot customer on the end of each one of these invoices.
So just to make sure I understand you correctly, where's my, oh, sorry, this line always trips me out. So, and I'm not even like creating them. Oh, you're just saying like,
Can I try something here? Can I?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you
yeah,
got it.
go
No,
ahead.
you got it. Keep going. No, you're doing it.
Was 0, oh, misspell. Customer. So like that?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
So you don't need
All
to
right.
explicitly create a customer. It's already created right there.
Gotcha. Perfect. That makes sense. Awesome. Well, I super appreciate it. I'll let you guys get back to it.
You're very welcome. Andrew?
Yeah, hi. I like everything's working fine on my end. I'm just kind of curious, like when we have something that is like unit price where it appears in 2 tables. Now I can tell one of them to just not show up. So I can just say like but when I'm using my select, say I select item's name and I just don't select the unit price. So unit price now has to refer to the one I want it to. Or I can, you know, have the big thing that I start with, you know, be the one that I want. So if I want items unit price, then I say items, and then I have all the stuff. And then when I do unit price, I know it's going to look to items first because that's the first one. How do I distinguish them if I want both and I can't start with the first one? How do I say I want this unit price, not that unit price to print here, and that unit price, not this unit price to print there?
Yeah, I think it depends on if we're talking about when you're making the query, then I think what I've done here is a good example for the one we wrote. So to the syntax in SQL, and remember, every time you have these strings inside your active record statements, you're writing SQL, you're writing a raw SQL fragment. So the syntax is table name dot column name. So this is invoice items table, quantity column from that table. Here is an example of the unit price. So here's where I'm specifically saying invoice items.unit price. I'm wondering if I took this out, could I generate an error that says like, don't ambiguous column? Yep. Nailed it. PG, ambiguous column error, column reference unit price is ambiguous. Mm-hmm. So if I just say unit price here, it's like, which one? Because we joined to merchants, which goes through invoice items and items, it has both of those unit prices. So I think this is the exact scenario you're talking about, right?
It's similar, but
very similar.
Like, yeah, but what if you wanted everything from invoice items? So it's invoice items star, and everything from items, so item star. And now you have 2 unit prices in your end result. And they're different.
Oh, I see.
And now you want to go to your view and you say, okay, give me the unit price for this object. Now give me the other unit price. Wait, how do I know which one's going to be printed when?
I see what you're saying. Okay, so an example would be if I pry into my method call. So I'm prying outside of the method. So you're not saying inside the method, how do we refer to it? You're saying after we've already,
Yeah.
after we've done it. What did I, oh, this is a weird version. Not a weird version, but this is not the version we had. Let me do this. Let me go back to this other version. So select merchants. I think I actually want merchants.star and invoice items quantity times invoice items dot unit price. Yeah, let me just get this working again. We'll sum it. We'll alias it as revenue, and then we will order. Where did my order go? Oh, yeah, I was just totally playing around with this. Okay, yeah, I just want to get this test passing before I go too far. Yeah, that looks right. Yeah, that looks right to me. Okay, so now the method is working, but we've selected, oh, in this case, I actually haven't done what you said. I haven't selected invoices, unit price, and items unit price. And I actually don't think it would let me do that. So maybe, yeah, I think if I did this, it would say like, it would mess up my group or my aggregate. I don't know, let's see. Yeah, it's not gonna let me, oh, not invoices. Invoice items. Yeah, invoice items unit price must appear in the group by clause or be used in an aggregate function, which is kind of a bummer because I am using it in this aggregate function. I thought that that would just work. But yeah, that makes sense. We can't, for each merchant, what would this unit price be? Like which invoice? Yeah, this doesn't really make sense. Okay, so sorry, this is not a great example over here. Andrew, do you have an example that we can look at, or is this a hypothetical? And you're on mute.
Yeah, I got something. Let's. Okay, so this is back to the thing we were looking at before.
Mm-hmm.
What I've done is I've gone from invoice to invoice items to item, and I'm limiting it as it was before. And then I'm selecting everything from items and everything from invoice items. So that should include two separate things called unit price. I know that if I use this line of code instead of this line of code, then it would say, when it asks what the unit price is, it's going to check invoice items first. And I know that if I did items.name instead of everything, then I wouldn't even have to deal with the question of two invoice items. So there are ways of avoiding that. But if I wanted to have all of this and I had to go through here for some reason, then when I write down item, or item is just what I call all the stuff together, item.unit price, how do I know which unit price it's giving me? Because it seems to run. If I hit refresh, it runs fine. And
can you go back for 1 second? Where was the unit price in that output?
In
Which
the output,
number was it?
I think it's the last one. Is it this one?
I think, yeah, that looks right.
unit price
85. What was it? 85642. Can you do what you were saying? Can you change your query a little bit and get it to display the other unit price?
So I guess, yeah, so, well, I don't know which one it is. So first let's try seeing if changing this to name gives me the other unit price. So that doesn't change it at all. So now let's do items dot, let's actually,
Quantity.
let's not get any of the items.
Oh, gotcha.
That way we know that it's not anything, and then we'll delete all this stuff. One thing.
Yeah, and so
and
I
now
think
it's
you need
giving
to
an error.
change it. Yeah, so I think you need to change it back to items dot star to say to get the item unit price, right?
Yeah, that's right. My bad. Okay. And that's what it looks like. And it looks very similar. So maybe the two things are identical in this case. Like the numbers are the same for, which might make sense. Some of them are going to have the same unit price in both tables. But when that doesn't hold, what happens?
Yeah, let's do something really hacky here just to like try and demonstrate this. Can we set at items.unit price English times? Which items are we? Oh, we're looking at all the items. Let's say at items dot first. Let's do this on line 32. I'm sorry, line 32. Let's say at items dot first dot update, and let's pass it a keyword argument of unit price and a value of 1.
Like that.
So close. Do unit price and then the colon goes after, and then just colon and then space 1.
Okay.
There you go. That's a keyword argument there. Okay, so we're just being really hacky. We're gonna just force the first price of the first item to be the first item's price to be 1. So can you refresh now?
Should that go after I define items, or does it really go before?
No, I think before. I think we want to change the data before and then make the query. Undefined method first for nil class. Oh, that's why you were saying that. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, let's actually just do capital I item. This is going to be pretty hacky. Yeah, but that's okay. We're just playing around with it. What, can you go back to your view? What are the things that we're showing? We're showing item name, item unit price. Cool.
Yeah.
So can you change item.first.unit price update 1? That seems like that should, could you just say at items? Could you comment out lines 35 through 37?
35 through 37.
Yeah.
Okay.
And could we just say at items equals item.all?
Okay, 1 second.
So what I want to see here is like, can we just successfully update that item? Oh, that's why. Oh, okay. Okay, let's go back. I think I'd see what I did wrong. Let's delete that line. We don't need it. Let's uncomment those 3 lines again. And we wanna change one of this invoices items. So rather than capital I item on line 33, can you do at invoice dot items dot first? So we want to make sure we change one of this invoices items. Yeah. Okay, let's do it again.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Okay. So we've changed that unit price to 1. Let's go back to our code now. And let's change the select statement to items.name invoices.star like you had before.
Okay.
And it gets undefined method unit price.
Did I spell this wrong?
Invoices dot, oh, invoice items, sorry. And take out the S on invoices.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, okay, so we've created the scenario. It is possible that this is something that we could run into. Now, what is the solution? I have no idea. I'm sorry that I don't actually have a solution for you, but I would just Google this. Let's just see if there's an easy Google here. Maybe like ActiveRecord select attribute with same name, or with, I don't even know how to like say this in English. How to retrieve the same name attribute of a join table. That seems close. -1, that's not good. Maybe Google ActiveRecord, ActiveRecord maybe adder reader, ActiveRecord adder reader, and then maybe specify table name. Look at that fourth one. It says how ActiveRecord finds the attributes of a model. I want to know how ActiveRecord access the tables and columns in the database. What's like an answer? Yeah, I don't know. I don't even really know how to accurately describe what we're doing here. Yeah, I don't know. I think I would look for, let me do some Googling on my end. ActiveRecord. I just want to know, like, how do you retrieve an attribute from ActiveRecord? Can you do if you go back to your code, could you change item.unit price on line 10 in your view? And so this one is selecting the invoice items. So can we say .read underscore attribute? And 2 T's an attribute. Sorry, the first T is 2 T's.
I am very bad at spelling, as you can see.
Me too. And then pass it a string of items dot unit price. And once you finish typing that out, wrap it in a string.
So items.unit price.
And unit underscore price.
Like that?
Yep. And yeah, let's see if that changes.
Well, it
didn't like that. It didn't find it. It didn't give me an error. Yeah, I'm not sure. This is a really interesting problem. I've never thought about it. I'm sure there's got to be some way to do it, but that actually might not be true. Just the way that Ruby works, it's probably storing these in instance variables, and you can't have 2 instance variables with the same name holding different pieces of data. So I think it might be perfectly reasonable to assume that there's no way to do this. So I'm kind of backtracking on what I just said. There might just be no way to do this. And the second one is just overriding the first one. So in this case, the invoice items one is overriding the items one. Yeah.
Well then, thankfully, my project does not depend on this at all. And
Good.
so I appreciate the learning opportunity. It was interesting playing around. Thank you very much. I'll let Aiden ask his question.
So Aiden, probably don't have time to get your question right now, but ask it in project check-ins.
Yeah, no worries. That was I wanted to stick around just for Andrew's question. That was very interesting.
Awesome.
Would you
All right, well, we'll
solve
see you all in
that?
the
Oh, sorry.
afternoon.
Would you solve that
gotta
with
run.
2 queries?
Oh, would I solve it with 2 queries? I don't know. I think I would probably wait for a use case to really, like, it's kind of hard to imagine the specific use case. So
Got it.
yeah, I think it's context dependent. It's one of those problems.
Totally. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. See